Now, I don't know about you, but when I discover even the smallest little stain on my shirt or on my tie, that becomes all I can see. It doesn't matter if the 99% of the shirt is free of any kind of blemish and is clean. That one little speck then becomes the center that I become so self-conscious about because I assume that that's all anyone else can see either. I kind of need to just walk around with like a bottle of Shout in my pocket for those moments. But keeping our clothes clean and free of blemish and keeping our lives free of stain is hard work. I kind of feel that it's such hard work because if we're noticing that blemish, then we assume everyone else sees it too. And with noticing comes judging. And God forbid that anyone see us without our lives all fully put together. Like we try real hard to put up that good front sometimes. Now, if we're all honest, we'll admit there are those moments in which we kind of just have to let go and realize that life isn't going to be perfect, and it's just not going to happen that day. I used to call those moments parenting toddlers. My kids had this unique ability of getting yogurt everywhere, right? They were just really creative at this. And it doesn't matter how much you try to control it. It would be on the counters and the couch and our clothes. It just multiplied and spread. We even just got to the point that when people would come over, we had a slip cover for our couch that the only time we brought it out was when guests were coming, just to cover up all the stains, because sometimes covering up was just a whole lot easier than cleaning it, because some of those stains just weren't coming out. Now, in this season after Epiphany, we've taken on this theme of shout out. And we've heard already the heavens opened and God shouting, giving an identity for who Jesus is. We've heard kind of the shout out to us, claiming us as God's own beloved, as God's children. And today we hear a different kind of shout out. We hear a shout it out, as in Jesus shouting out to the things in our lives that simply don't belong there. The things in our lives that offer a word about who we are, that masks our true identity as God's beloved, that distract us from our relationship with God. So in our reading, we had a number of shouted outs, a bunch of stories where Jesus, although it doesn't tell us he's screaming, it also doesn't tell us that he's not. But a bunch of stories where Jesus calls out of people those things that don't belong. He shouts out the fever of Simon's mother-in-law, a fever that has taken control of her life. And in a world before Tylenol, this is a pretty perilous kind of event. The fever has already separated her from her community. It has forced her to be bedridden, and it seeks her very life. And it is from the clutch of death that Jesus reaches out and grabs hold of her and raises her to new life. And then we see in dramatic fashion how many have come to seek and find from Jesus a sense of wholeness and healing, a fuller sense of humanity and dignity than they are normally afforded. See, in the first century, persons who lived with disabilities were oftentimes discounted from society and cast off for whatever perceived blemish that people saw in them, never given the opportunity to live into God's blessedness. And then there are all those who are coming to seek Jesus who are full of demons, who seek to be freed from all that has taken control of their lives. And in all of these stories, while physical healing does take place, I'm convinced it's the social healing that is much more significant. Now, just a note on demons here, because whenever we hear that word in Scripture, I think our curiosities peak up a little. We want to understand what is meant by these. We want to understand if they're still present with us today. And demons, on some level, seem pretty scary. They're unpredictable, uncontrollable, uncontainable, outside of our understanding, and things that we don't understand tend to scare us a little bit. And so we've made attempts at trying to explain away the things that don't make sense. And so I just want to be clear that when we talk about demons in these passages, we're really not talking about how some theologians have tried to explain these texts away to make them not so scary, that these are not people who live with epilepsy or mental illnesses. And to describe demon possession as such really does spiritual damage to those who live with real mental illnesses. But instead, I think we need to broaden kind of our understanding here of all of these things, that maybe the demons that Jesus is casting out are all those things that seized control over their lives. And maybe we can think of demons as these things that separate us and keep us out of healthy relationships with God and of one another. When addictions to alcohol, drugs, gambling, pornography, and others take control of us, become a power that on their own we are not able to escape on our own, that is a demon for us. That when we fall into patterns of self-talk that have us doubting our value and worth to God, when we only see the parts of ourselves that we don't like and then assume that that's all anyone else can see about us either, these are demons in us and are powerful forces that distract us from how God sees us. And these demons need to be shouted out. The reality is, none of us are perfect. Metaphorical stains are all over our lives, and there are times when what we need is a good bottle of spiritual shout. Now, not to plug any particular brand here, but I really actually do prefer OxyClean. I really don't know if it works any better, but when I think of shouting out stains, Billy Mays is who comes to mind. Now, a little more, he's kind of a personal hero of mine, and so, because when you watch his infomercials and you see his passion, it's hard to doubt that what he says is true. It's hard to doubt that those tough stains can come out. And you just want, you're cheering along with them. But he had this way of assuring those who he encountered that the impossible, what seemed impossible, was in fact possible. I think maybe it's that same kind of assurance that attracted people to Jesus. Now, I don't know what else that they had in common besides this charisma and probably good beards, but Jesus goes around proclaiming the kingdom of God, that time is here and now, and there seems to be real power in his words that draw people in. They believed that what Jesus was doing was making a difference, that he had the power to help clean the parts of their lives that seemed messy and dirty. Which as a pastor I find so interesting. I find this interesting because as a pastor I think that people are generally on their best behavior around me. Like there's a side of them that they really don't want me to know about, lest they might feel judged. And part of me gets it. It takes time for that connection, that bond to be developed, for that level of trust before people are willing to share those parts of their lives that seem messy and dirty and out of place, the parts that aren't always figured out, those parts that seem so broken and unfixable. Which I also find somewhat unfortunate because I know that at least the pastors here, we've kind of seen a few messes in our lives. We know what people go through, and we also know that what helps in some of these moments of brokenness is to be able to connect and to share that. But we see this with Jesus. We see all kinds of people coming to him, coming in front of him, and they bring all of who they are. They bring all these stories that they tell themselves about how they're too stained, how they don't belong, how they can't be loved. And they lay these stories at Jesus' feet. And Jesus claims them. He shouts it out and reminds them that they are God's beloved. So to live out these words and to wear proudly maybe one of my own stains, and partly trusting that when you look at me, you will hopefully still see more than what I see in myself at times. Growing up, I rode the short bus to school. Now, where I grew up, this meant something in particular. This was the bus that all the special ed kids rode because it was the small bus that could make its way around town to pick up all those kids that didn't fit in, and so they could amass us in one spot so we'd have a class of our own. Every day riding this bus meant that it was a kind of personal reminder of this great stain that I assumed is all that others could see. Now, I got to ride this bus because I won the award for being the most creative speller in first grade. I didn't read as early as a lot of my classmates, and I couldn't keep up as well, and that may have led me to cause just a few disruptions in my classrooms. The school district would label this as a learning disability, and years later I would learn to call it dyslexia. But what most of the kids my age saw was the bus that I rode. And boy, would I have given anything to not have to ride that bus. But through some process of kind of self-discovery, it did eventually occur to me that riding a different bus wouldn't change anything. I would still be the creative speller that I am today. I might still fall behind my peers at various times in the reading assignments. Riding a different bus wouldn't change any of those parts about me. But really at the heart of what I felt was not a need to be cured of dyslexia. It was to be seen as more than it. My demon isn't dyslexia. It's the belief that there is nothing about me of value because of this one spot. And then as I turn to these stories of Jesus healing, the part that amazes me most is that what Jesus starts with in these encounters isn't healing. It's a sense of offering humanity and belonging. It is first being seen and known by Jesus. And even in the midst of all these miraculous healing stories, which are never once about Jesus telling someone that they are broken and need to be fixed, but instead about proclaiming God's kingdom, that God's kingdom is near, that God's kingdom is here, and that you know that when you realize God's love for you. That what Jesus shouts out to all who seek him is that they are the beloved children. Now, it took me 3 elementary schools and 2 churches to experience what this kind of community might feel like. What this community looks like when we are in a place where we don't need to hide our stains, where we can bear one another's pains and struggles, knowing that what we first see in each other isn't a stain, but see each other as a child of God. It took some time to realize that really I didn't need a spiritual bottle of shout to wipe these stains, but to bring this before Jesus, knowing that what we first get is Jesus seeing us and telling us of God's love and mercy, reminding us that we are his beloved, and shouting out those demons that sometimes aren't the thing we think they are, but shouts out those demons that have us distracted from who God says that we are. Amen.